One of the most exciting and controversial sections of a SharePoint deployment is putting in extensions. This is one of those pieces where there's a lot of discussion around different approaches, how you come into it, all of those different concepts. We're going to be looking at the appropriate way to connect in with SharePoint and the way your choices in putting your own custom code into the proper place. The two approved ways to put in extensions for SharePoint are solutions or features or apps. Solutions features, you'll see them used back and forth. Solutions is the packaging that you use to put that content in, and then features the actual implementation. So you can see people talk about solutions, which are groups. Generally, solutions may only have one feature in it, which is why you see them back and forth. And then features themselves are the actual content that you've put up into SharePoint. And then apps are a new model in SharePoint 2013. There's still some discussion around how things work, but this model was actually put together to enable no-code deployments when you actually do need to have code to work in the work on SharePoint data. The Microsoft recommendation between the two is for administrative tasks, deploy those as solutions or features. Anything that's user functionality that the user will be looking at, those should be deployed as apps. Note that when we're talking about solutions and features, we're not talking about sandbox solutions. If you're used to working with those, the app is an extension of that model and actually moves the executable code from inside of SharePoint where it's managed to off the SharePoint, at least the IIS app pool, into another model so that you actually don't have to do that resource contingent in management. It does require an external connection because you are moving that code out of the SharePoint app pool in IIS, but the benefit for that is that you literally cannot take resources away because you're not in the same app pool. For deploying apps, this is the new process that you're going through. You're going to need a little bit more detail on this. They can be deployed either through the Microsoft Online Store or through the local farm. You'll see a lot of similarities here between how SharePoint apps work as to how Windows 8 apps work and how Windows Phone apps work. So you can see a theme here as you're going through. The Microsoft Online Store is becoming that central repository for applications across organizations. You still have your local repository that you can actually deploy inside your enterprise or inside your organization moving forward. Setting up a SharePoint for a local farm deploy can be a bit involved. I say that because it does take a good bit of detail to go through that. You've got a situation where that you're going to need to be using SSL certificates. You're going to actually have to have custom domain names. There's a lot involved with this. What you're basically doing is you're creating a lightweight implementation of the Microsoft Online Store inside your organization. So you're going to go through all of that. That is fairly detailed, so I'm going to point you to an article that gives you the entire process. This walks through, it's about 6 pages long of getting your SSL certificates and actually pushing out custom CNAMEs into your DNS entry, and there's a lot of detail that comes in here. But the summation of this is you can actually push those solutions up into your local store, and then your SharePoint users can actually pull those down. The reason why it's so involved with this is because of the fact of what I just said. Your users can pull down those apps. You're not pulling down SharePoint apps from a solutions repository or those galleries that you're used to working with in SharePoint, but it is coming from an external location, and it does have to be configured with how that content works with your SharePoint farm, how it actually goes through the correct URLs and comes through that, because the architecture inside an app is that it is pretty much as it says, an application outside of your SharePoint farm, but that's actually working with your SharePoint implementation through the client APIs. All these are kind of getting into the developer side of things, but just know that there's a lot of benefits for using this for keeping your server secure and healthy. But it does require some additional work, and it does require an additional deployment area for you to run those applications in outside of your SharePoint site. So if you choose the app model, then you're going to have a little bit more infrastructure that you're going to need. I would actually strongly suggest in your planning stage going through and making the allowances for deploying apps because we know that this is the direction that SharePoint is going. The solutions is something that's been with us for a while now. It came in SharePoint 2007, and it's recommended that the solutions containing code be deployed with PowerShell. We saw that actually in a previous section we deployed templates as a solution. Those are what's called no-code solutions. They're very easy to go through. They're basically some configuration in XML, but there's no executable code. With solutions that do require executable code, such as the solutions that your developers may create for doing synchronization with back-end systems, line of business systems, all of those that something has to be done behind the scenes to actually process that data, you go through with PowerShell. This is a little bit different than before. If you have done these deployments before, you've actually been able to do it with an application called STSADM. This is a legacy app in SharePoint now, but actually still exists inside. We'll show you where to find that in one of our demos. But PowerShell contains all the functionality that you need for deploying those solutions, and actually is a little bit easier to do. Microsoft's going in this direction for PowerShell simply because it maintains consistency with the other management tools, and everything kind of fits into place at that point. The process for deploying a solution is 4 commandlets. You've got the add SPS solution, very simple. It actually comes in, put that solution into the SharePoint repository so it has the package and it can actually manage that in itself. You want to install the SPS solution. That's taking it out from the repository and actually telling SharePoint, open it up, take a look at what's in there, actually take care of what's happening inside the solution package. Install SP application content, and you have to do this on each front end. Again, this is where PowerShell has an advantage over the traditional STSADM process because you can actually do remote administration with PowerShell. You can actually connect into those servers. You can actually script this so that it goes through and puts that on each of your front end rather than having to go to each one of those and put it in. This process is actually opening up the solution package and making sure that the content is sitting on the web front ends correctly. Again, if you're using apps, no content is actually really being put onto the page. It's being just integrated in with the SharePoint web front ends and is running on another server. With solutions, it's actually running in the SharePoint server and making sure that any resources, any graphics, any additional files are on those web front ends that can be accessed wherever the users come in, hit your SharePoint server. So that's what you're doing here. And then once it's actually deployed, you can enable the SP feature through the PowerShell. At this point, you actually can go through and do it through your graphical command on Central Administration or in your SharePoint site collections, and you're in good shape there. But you actually have some options here on the last step. That being said, once you're kind of going through this, you're going to probably get very comfortable with scripting with PowerShell if you're not already, and you'll probably just roll through. So once you have your features out, you'll need to manage them. That's part of the entire task of keeping your SharePoint site rolling. Once they're deployed, the features are managed through the site settings. There are locations for site features and site collection features on each of your sites. So you actually have 2 locations you can be looking at that. If you activate it on the site collection, you're actually rolling it down, or you can be very specific and activate it on your site features. There are also different scopes in this, so some, depending upon how you're actually deploying your solutions, they may show up in one or the other if you actually need to have it at a higher level. When you go through and do your software requirements gathering with your developers, you'll need to be very specific about where you want those solutions to show up at, so you can make sure that they have the correct resources and they're not going outside of their scope. Once you make sure those resources are in place, you can actually install them in a different location. They are assigned for their scope. So you can actually put them in different site collections. You can actually put them out at the web app. You can actually roll those in different places. Knowing where you install them is really important in the management tasks. So be aware and document where those are coming into place. And then we come into disabling features. The question is, why would you have a feature disabled but not deleted? There are some reasons there. Features themselves are groupings of functionality. You actually have capabilities that sit inside of those features, and you may actually have multiple features inside of a solution. So you're actually looking at situations that you may have one piece of functionality that's still good, but the next is not, or things may have changed. If it is outdated, then you disable that feature. You keep a record of the functionality, you keep a record of the data. You don't have to remove the entire solution, repackage it, and push it up without that particular piece in there. This is also very good for keeping track of what's happening inside your organization, to see what has been active and what hasn't, because all this is logged. You can actually pull that in, and you can know when that feature was activated, when it wasn't, re-enable it again maybe. There's some situations where you may want a feature operational, maybe say in certain phases of a project or certain stages of deployment, so that you can actually have all of that information taken into account. Then pull it back out so it's not accidentally used over time, and then push it back out so it works again. One other thing you want to do with disabling features is when you update them, when you're actually pushing out new functionality that may overwrite the feature, you do need to disable that feature temporarily, as the active features cannot be overwritten. The reason for that is that the feature itself may be in operation. If you have a very busy farm, it probably is in operation, maybe in multiple places at the same time. So disabling that feature allows the system to know that there's a known state inside that feature, that you have a situation where you can pull that executable code out, put the new executable code in place, and then restart it back up, and then everything will be in the proper location, and you won't have something halfway through the execution that's either killed and rolled back, or errors out, or that may go through in a different path and be in an indeterminate state. So once you actually have the solutions, they're in place, maybe they're out of date, you don't need to update them anymore. Your process has changed. You can go in and remove those solutions. Again, it's recommended that solutions be removed by using the PowerShell commands rather than the STSADM commands, though those will continue to function. To remove a solution, it's a two-part process. You have to go in and disable the feature. Just like you would through the graphic interface, you'd actually have to go in, and an active feature cannot be removed from the system. Then you've got the uninstall SP feature, which is where it actually pulls that back out. Note that it's a install of a solution but uninstall of the feature. It's actually the way the system's looking at things there, because once it's unpackaged, you're looking at features rather than solutions. This can actually, you need to keep track of this, because it can cause an interesting situation where you're pushing up additional solutions that have multiple features, and then they may not all be disabled for your deployment. Just be aware of that, keep track of it, and make sure that you have everything in place for your solutions deploys that you need as you go forward. You can uninstall each particular feature, or you can do everything in there. Again, as you're going through, very often solutions generally have just one feature, but then there are situations where you have packages of features that are interdependent. Check with each of your solution documentation. This is why you need to make sure you have good solution documentation before you roll things out, to know where those interdependencies are, where you may break things, where you may have the relationships back and forth, because you're going to need to know that as you start pulling those features off. It's a fairly detailed process of making sure that you're in excellent shape before you do that. I would actually recommend that you go through and disable everything that you're going to disable. Check and make sure that your functionality is not been affected, that you haven't lost anything, that is not a dependency for something else before you do that and install it. Because if you do need it, if there is something going on, if there's something that slipped through your documentation, being able to reinstall the feature, then go back and figure out what's going on, or talking with the developer, is a lot easier than finding the solution, redeploying it. Because one of the situations with redeploying it is you actually can have a different GUID. It's possible to have that situation, though it should be embedded in there, and you actually run into additional problems of getting that feature back in the state that it was. So after you've removed your solutions, there's some pieces about cleaning up. The solutions themselves may not clean up completely when removed. The XML in the package itself may leave data, and most of the time they actually do leave data, just to make sure that data is not lost, and you have to explicitly go clean it up. you can actually go through it. You will need to be aware of that and go through your process. You can clean up manually. This will actually involve a number of things. The nice thing about this for manual cleanup is that you can open up the solutions package and actually see the XML inside of it. You'll know exactly what the package has done because that's the instruction it goes out to tell it what to do. This will probably mean that the admin will have to go out to each web front end and go in and take out those resources that are sitting on the web front ends. You generally want to do this just for completeness. If you've got content out there that's kind of hanging out that you're not really sure what it's for, that's going to be a bit of a challenge for maintenance and for later on with your backups and restores, knowing what you actually need and what you don't. And so you do want to do that, and then any data inside will have to be talked about with the content owner to determine if they want to keep that for historical or auditing purposes, or because that solution has come up that functionality has been removed, then they may not want the data in there because it implies a process that may not be in place at that point. A nice piece is that there are some tools. The featureadmin.coplex.com is a great little open source tool that you can use to look at your farm. It can actually tell you what's there. This is also an excellent tool for if you have solutions that have been damaged or may have a problem. They may have been done a force remove without a disable, which actually can be done. You can actually get your server into a challenging state if you try hard enough with your different command line tools. What Feature Admin will help you go through, figure out what features are in indeterminate states, help you understand where the content is, where all the different pieces are in place, and be able to help you clean up. So highly recommend the Feature Admin package there if you're going through and doing the cleanups. It will help you out a lot and help you work through your system. I've mentioned back and forth the STSADM and PowerShell. We'll need to look at that just a little bit for those of you who are veterans of SharePoint. If you're a new admin, I would very highly recommend that you just default to PowerShell. But if you've been using it a while, you've got some scripts, you already have your processes in place. They're both tools for scripting and command line management of SharePoint. They're both able to go through and be run. They run in different locations. The PowerShell has a specific SharePoint PowerShell command line that it runs through that gives you access to the SharePoint commandlets, whereas STSADM is still just through the standard Windows command line. It's embedded, it's a tool, it does a lot of pieces there. Note there are still some pieces of functionality that PowerShell does not have that STSADM can do. These are very kind of edge case areas or things that can actually be done inside the graphic interface or the web interface for management. If you don't use STSADM, you can still get most of the processes done, but some of it you might not be able to script if you're not using STSADM, so be aware of that. STSADM, the reason why we're talking about this, it's been depreciated. It's still deployed with SharePoint, but anytime Microsoft depreciates a feature, it means that we're going to have it work right now. If it's not doing the same thing, if you find a bug, don't ask us, and we may not deploy it in the future. So if you're putting in new processes, unless you have a very, very good reason for using STSADM, I would recommend just kind of leaving that alone, moving forward, and moving everything over to PowerShell. And then PowerShell has very powerful commands. It's very much the recommended way to manage SharePoint installations in 2013 and moving forward. There's a couple of reasons for this. PowerShell, by its very syntax, is going to give you some more control over the different capabilities in SharePoint. It's actually has a lot better scripting commands. If you're used to doing a lot of automation as an administrator, and I'm hoping you do, you can actually pull in the local variables. It's actually got the ability to chain the PowerShell commands with each other and roll it through, whereas with STSADM you were doing some pipes and you actually had to do some various complex things to make it work, and still you ran into some limitations. PowerShell is really built for scripting. It also can actually pull in remote sites and manage your entire farm from one location. STSADM can do that with some work, but PowerShell is fairly a native way to do it, and it's the same way that you'll manage your IIS. It's the same way you'll manage your storage servers or your SQL servers. So it's a very common way. So a common way of doing management. So if you're working with it, you get some more powerful commands. You get some better ability to script your information and script your operations, and then you're now using a common tool set with your other systems in your Microsoft arsenal, rather than having these very custom tools that SharePoint has used in the past. And so now we're going to go and take a look at the features that you can have in SharePoint and how we can work through them. So now we're here on your site settings screen. We're going to take a look at activating and deactivating the features that have been deployed to the server, and then we're going to take a quick look at the two methods to actually get those solutions on and off of your server. We're going to look at STSADM and how you run it, and then a PowerShell commandlet to see what you've got on your server. So as we mentioned, two locations in a site collection. Under site settings, we've got the manage the site features, and then we've got the site collection features. Let's take a look at both of those and see what different features we have under each and what we have options to do. So we'll start with the site features. And you can see we've got a fairly long list of site features as we come through here. We've got class web types, class my site host content, so if you're doing a learning system, community site features. Each one gives you a short little blurb about what you can actually expect from the feature itself, but you really need to be aware of what's going on. This is why we need some additional documentation. You can see that it gives us a little sample of what the feature will do, but it doesn't give us a full detail, as we would want to know what we're doing. So let's go down. Let's use the hold. Hold is a feature used to track external actions, litigations, investigations, audits that require you to suspend the disposition of documents. That gives us a quick little detail about that. We should have some additional documentation on what that means for our system, but we'll go through and we'll activate the feature. And now we come down and we see our hold has been activated. What does that mean for our system? That depends upon what the feature itself does. Many features actually create new metadata or create new repositories. You can actually go through and take a look at that. The easiest way to do it is actually open up the solution that you deploy the feature in, and it will have an XML document that gives you all of the details about what's going on. It will deploy any DLLs. Again, depending upon how you've deployed it, it may be in the GAC, Global Assembly Cache, or it may just be local for those. You want to be aware that most of the SharePoint solutions do have full access to your SharePoint site. This is the breakout that we actually had. There were and are depreciated but still supported solutions that do use Sandbox, which don't have full access. But that's where we're kind of moving with the different options. Solutions have full access inside your system, and applications are running externally and are basically acting like a client. So we'll come through. We've activated that. We'll deactivate the hold as well. Let's not leave it out here. And it'll let us know. Warning, you're about to deactivate it. This is to make sure that you don't accidentally deactivate something that you don't want to. It is letting you know user data customizations associated with this feature may be lost. The system at this point does not know. It's actually part of the configuration. So it's letting you know that this feature, when you deactivate it, may clean up after itself. You need to be aware of what that functionality is when you're doing that. Also, any active features and apps that depend on this feature may fail to function. So this is one of those pieces of when you're deactivating it, you can actually do those tests and make sure that everything's still working correctly. You should have if it's a vendor solution, then they should let you know what they depend upon. If it's your own developers, you may need to go back and check with them and make sure that you know what the dependencies are back and forth. But once you do that, you can actually test yourself, deactivate it, and go through the system and make sure everything's running correctly. So now we've looked at the site features and seen some of the pieces. Let's go down and look at the site collection features. Note these are two separate repositories for features, and where those features show up is basically where you've actually deployed things. So you can actually see here, whereas before we had the class information, we don't have those in the site collection. We have different features. These are more set up for, you can see, syndicated hub, cross-farm site permission, something that's very useful, but also opens up your security model. So you've got all of these different pieces. We've got our custom site collection help that in an early section we actually turned on. What we'll do is we'll actually, again, deactivate this feature here. You can see it works exactly like the site features, and we'll deactivate it. We get exactly the same message, and you go through and deactivate, and you're good to go. What this will do, though, is because that was the custom site collection help, what that will do is if we go back and look at our help capabilities that we did before, then we're going to see that we're going to get some errors because it's going, if we've got links or if we actually tied in to that custom site help, then we'll need to go through and undo those links, or people that have had bookmarks into that location would have problems. So this is why you need to be very aware of what's going on, what capabilities those features give you, and you need to do some planning and detail on adding and removing features. So as you can see, managing features and solutions becomes a bit of a experience as you're managing your farm. This is one of the reasons why there's been some discussion around using built-in configuration versus custom code. You'll see if you have a development team, they're going to be very enthusiastic about putting their own solutions inside the farm. You as a administrator are probably going to want to keep that as minimal as possible. There's going to be some level of middle ground that you're going to have to work with. For any time that your devs come up with a great new solution or feature that they want to put in, push back and see if there's not something that can already be done. You want to use solutions and features exactly where they're useful, but you don't want to overuse them. And one of the big things that we've seen with SharePoint is if your developers have a dev environment, they're going to go to that tool first rather than some of the configuration, some of the internal functionality in SharePoint, and dig a little deeper, find out what's going on, and you'll see the screen and be working with some of these capabilities just a little bit less. So that being said, we've looked at the activate and deactivate. Let's look at the tools that are going to help you get those solutions and features inside of SharePoint. This is Windows Server 2012, so we've got our start screen, and what we're going to do is the first section is we're going to actually launch the SharePoint 2013 management shell. This is where you run all of your PowerShell commands. Now, one thing to note is even though I'm logged on as administrator of the box, the running this as just clicking on this is going to not give us access to the SharePoint farm because the local administrator and the API levels aren't going to work correctly. So what you need to do to launch the management shell is right-click on, again, Windows Server 2012. If you're running Windows Server 2008, just make sure you run it as administrator. Come down here, run and accept. And you see we get our SharePoint 2013 management shell. Comes in, looks like very much like a standard command line shell if you work with that before, but you notice we have the PS, which is telling us this is PowerShell. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to run one of the commandlets so you can see how it's done. There are approximately 120 different commands. You can see a different reference on TechNet of all the different things. You'll probably want to look at that for managing SharePoint and seeing all the different features you've got in there. But let's just do a simple get spweb. So we want to know, just see what our webs are on the different sites. We'll tell it the site we want to see, and then just give it a local host. This is nice and simple, so we can just say, look at what we've got here and tell us what's going on. So we go forward, we get the URL. It's telling us that our local host is WinServe 2013, and that we have that is the URL of our SP web. We've got one of those in place, and we've got the details there. If we wanted to, as we've been working on let's take a look here, And you can see there is our IT testing, our Project A1, and our Project A that we've done in other sections. So now we can actually go through and very quickly with these commands, see what our information is, pull that information back, deploy our solutions, activate. Each one of those commands are fairly regularly done of get, remove, set, add, all of those kind of things. So this is the recommended way of going through SharePoint 2013 and getting all of the information and doing your scripts management. So definitely recommend that you put your processes around that. For if you do choose to go with STSADM, we'll need to go back into the start screen, and I do this normally by the command prompt. Let's go in and again run as administrator. And here we're going to have a nice little type. Because as you know, the SharePoint commands are generally tied down pretty deep. If you choose to use STSADM a lot, you may want to have a copy of it in a better path or add this path to your server so it's a little easier. But let's go ahead and start typing. And I need to do this as well. And you can see we go through and we got a fairly long path into there, but we can actually pop up and see our STSADM. And if I've typed it right, you can actually see that it will give you all of the details. So if you forget how to actually do any of the items in STSADM, you can actually come through and take a look. It will give you examples of doing the backups, the sites, the deploy solutions, all of those kind of things. So this is a very specific tool. What happens is most of these commands that you're seeing inside for the options on STSADM have a PowerShell equivalent. So instead of a -O for whatever you're doing, you would just run the equivalent of one of these commands in PowerShell and be able to get things in place.